This show is proudly brought to you by the #Me Network. And now, join us as we go behind the closed doors. We will talk to the people behind the digital smiles, the people who make it happen. You are listening to the #Radio NZ Insider Series.
Welcome to the #Radio Insider Series. I'm Fid McAwesome.
I'm Chris McAwesome.
And I'm V8 Matty.
And this is our brand new podcast where we get to chat to some amazing people.
That's right, the Insider Series. So it's a change of direction from our usual thing. I hope you're going to enjoy these ones. They've certainly been a lot of fun putting together.
Yeah, so we've been recording this for, 3 months now?
About that.
Yeah, catching up with some amazing people from around the world of tech and gaming, and getting to sit down with them and actually talk to them about their stories and where they've come from and some funny stories that they've had along the way.
And so on our very first episode, we've got Chris Ford from Pixar.
This was a pretty cool interview to actually get the opportunity to speak to somebody from Pixar.
Yeah. I was pretty excited. Just over the whole Pixar. It's Pixar!
Yeah.
They do make the best animated movies.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is this, as you'll hear later, is his perception of what Pixar is over what us as the public perceive Pixar as. It's completely different from the inside, or especially where he sees it from, where he sits in the company. So quite an inspirational story as well of where the company's come from and where they are now.
Awesome. I think we should just kick it off and get going.
Yeah.
#Radio NZ.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So, basically, we'll start off. We'll just get you to introduce yourself and what your role is and stuff.
Yeah, so my name's Chris Ford. I'm the business director for RenderMan at Pixar Animation Studios. So I'm essentially responsible for the RenderMan business part of Pixar. When you think of Pixar, you think of us as a feature film animation studio, and of course we are. But when Pixar was originally founded back in 1986, when Steve Jobs bought the computer graphics division of Lucasfilm, the intent at that time was to make the studio a hardware and a software technology company, especially in the era of computer graphics. Of course, in the early 90s, Pixar pitched the notion of making a fully CG animated feature film to Disney, and of course that eventually became Toy Story, and Pixar became a movie studio. Yeah. However, throughout that period of time, Pixar continues to develop many of the core basic technologies used in generating photorealistic imagery and creating movie images and in computer graphics in general. So the RenderMan team, which is my team, is essentially almost the last part of Pixar as it originally was, but it's still a fundamental part of the soul and character of the studio. Yeah. Pixar is as much an innovator of the tools and the technologies used to make these amazing films as it is a studio that makes wonderfully creative movies. Yeah. And of course we supply that technology to the whole industry, the visual effects industry in particular, that uses that technology.
How did you get into Pixar?
So my history is that I actually started working in the production industry many years ago, but most people are in the industry because they're very creative individuals, and that's the end result. For me, I realized that the means was becoming more interesting than the ends. Yeah. In other words, how you do things, and often how you cheat, was becoming more satisfying. So I left the production industry. I actually worked for a long period of time for a company called Alias Wavefront. I was one of the original folks behind the design of Maya, and I was the original project manager for Maya.
So most people who work in 3D animation would know
Maya or games or all sorts. So I was the Maya product manager from version 1. Way back in 1998 when it was first released. Which was a very satisfying time in my career. But that was an example of where
kind of satisfying looking at where Maya's at now too.
Obviously, it's the Maya version 1 would be ridiculously simple compared to the enormously powerful and complicated solution it is now.
Do you look at it now as still being a bit of your heart and soul when you still look at Maya?
Oh yeah. I mean, you can't not spend like 5 or 6 years of your life building this, and even in the structure of Maya, there are almost like fossilized in it. You can still see in certain tools or workflows. What it originally was, which was designed to be a visual effects and an animation solution. And modeling and rendering became part of that as well. Yeah. And it was a result of two companies collaborating who were purchased by Silicon Graphics, one called Alias, one called Wavefront, who built that solution, and Autodesk now own it. But I was living in Santa Barbara at the time, and fortunately they moved everything to Canada, and because I wasn't able to go to Canada, I ended up moving to Autodesk, and I became the product manager for all of the 3D tools there for a few years, like 3ds Max, for example, is the best known. And then everything moved to Canada. You're probably seeing a theme here. So it was in 2005 that I got a call from Ed Catmull asking if they were looking for someone to run the RenderMan business at Pixar. So
when was that?
This is 2005.
Okay.
Yeah. Very early 2005, and I've been running that side of things, the RenderMan business, ever since. Yeah. And it's kind of been hugely satisfying, because photorealistic rendering is a very exciting and targeted area of technology that is still a long way to go in many ways.
Yeah. So does the software only get used in movie animation, or is it the same software that gets used in games and stuff like that as well?
Yeah, generally the RenderMan as a solution its main use is in feature film, special effects and animation, and that's what drives our development, because that's kind of like the aspirational part of the market, right? The level of visual complexity you see in a movie is what really drives people's expectations. They want it to look like Avatar, and every so often there's like a bar that just keeps rising. Certain movies come out, and they're distinct landmarks because the state of the art advanced. Jurassic Park was way back, probably when this all started. There was Titanic. Avatar was definitely one of those.
Basically, anything with James Cameron's name tag.
Exactly. James Cameron, highly influential, right, in pushing the technology, but pushing the technology to service, the artistic vision of the director. However, the same photorealistic technology is equally applicable in games, but usually in the cinematics rather than the not in game content. Visualization, NASA videos, this type of thing, or planetarium. There's a whole subset of RenderMan rendering used for like dome projection. These planetarium shows where they project like 8 or 12 images and stitch them all together on a large immersive environment. So all of that is part of what we do, is photorealism. But over the past couple of years, there has been a big change in the way images are rendered, technology change. Yeah. And a few years ago, it became possible to produce essentially physically based rendering or physically accurate rendering using ray tracing in a way that is far more accessible for people who are not specialists in rendering to do. It's not as if these techniques are new. The technology is new. It's not been. Ray tracing has been around for many years. Yeah. But there was a point a few years ago, all of a sudden, the cost of CPUs became so cheap. They became cheaper than having highly skilled technical directors and technical artists to put together the scenes that were typically characteristic of modern movies. Yeah. And that was a significant inflection point. RenderMan today is actually a different renderer to the one that was used in some of those movies I mentioned earlier. Yeah. It's an easy-to-use, pure ray tracer. You can just select standard materials, and essentially it simulates the whole physics of light inside of an environment or outside, depending on what you're doing, at the touch of a button. Yeah. It's in other words, it's accessible. Yeah. It's easier to do, and that was part of the theme I was touching on in my keynote yesterday. Yeah. That it's this new accessibility of photorealistic rendering combined with the accessibility of huge amounts of compute resource in the cloud that is not, is cheap to access. You don't have to buy a huge data center to do it. It's quite disruptive.
Yeah, when I saw that your keynote was
rendering in the cloud, my initial reaction was quite sceptical.
Right.
And I was like, bullshit. Why would anyone do that? And then when you mentioned about, I wasn't too sure actually, were you saying yesterday that by doing it through the cloud, that it reduced the time?
Yes, well, at the moment, we're still at this transition point, right? I mean, most larger studios, are not using the cloud. They're rendering shots in data centers, which often have air gaps, between the machines and the internet. The issues.
Is that a fear of security?
Yes, yeah. I mean, obviously, some of the IP and intellectual property associated, with upcoming movies is hugely valuable. These are billions of dollars hanging off of, a stage release and marketing of the film. So the issues are not just technological; they're as much to do with the business and the security aspects. And these are all being addressed.
Yeah.
They're not irresolvable, but they are factors.
Yeah.
They are key factors. But the cloud is being used today to render shots, and there are studios who are rendering significant shots in the cloud. And they've passed this kind of fear barrier where, they've been afraid that they might lose those assets. Because in reality, there are financial institutions, there are other, groups who have just as valid concerns over security who are using the cloud as well. But of course, the movie industry likes to think it's particularly unique.
How accessible is it for? So I saw that you had the 3 tiers.
Right.
And you had right at the beginning the first tier being the big movies.
Right.
Production.
The big studios, yeah. It's like to describe that. There hasn't been much change in the really big studios who do visual effects, and everyone knows their names. We're talking about Industrial Light and Magic and Weta and Pixar and DreamWorks, and Movie Picture Company and Double Negative in London. There are about 10 to 15 of them worldwide, and they haven't really changed, and they're all really big. And underneath that, though, is a group of what we call second-tier studios that are nowhere near that big, but they're doing the same caliber of work, the same level of work. So you look at the credit roll at the end of a heavy visual effects movie, and you see a huge block of names associated with one of the big studios, and then you see these smaller groups of names with studios you've never heard of.
Yeah.
And that's actually where a lot of the growth is. There are people coming out of large studios who have the skills necessary to produce this work, but they haven't in the past been able to afford the big render farm or the whole infrastructure. What's liberating about the cloud and the way the technology trends are moving at the moment is that essentially they could set up a studio and potentially produce shots that are of the same quality as a large studio without the heavy capital cost. Which is not to understate, the unique skills and expertise that, existing established large studios have. That's the core of what they do, right? How to assemble really complicated visual effects shots and convince you as the audience. But there are many people who could do this as well, and probably we're going to see more collaboration in the future with smaller studios all contributing different shots to a common project. One thing that will probably help that, and this was an announcement that Pixar made at SIGGRAPH, which is the main computer graphics event just a few weeks ago in LA. We announced a open sourcing of something called Universal Scene Description, or USD, which essentially is a format that will enable you to transport entire scenes, animations, the whole environments between different studios.
Oh, wow.
And we open sourced it deliberately because ultimately, what's unique to a studio, whether it's a Pixar or Weta or whatever, the technology obviously is, and how to use it is part of the competence, but the real unique asset is the creative culture of that studio, and that can't be transported. So multiple smaller studios working on common projects with common standards, enabling them to transport assets backwards and forwards, must be the way this industry is moving.
Is that unusual for Hollywood, who is naturally a very competitive sort of environment, to be heading towards more of a collaborative?
It's highly notable that the initiative for all of these common interchange formats has come from the studios itself. And it's been a collaborative effort between studios like Pixar or ILM or Sony and others. And it's not come from software companies. It's been tried, but I think when that's been tried, software companies have tried, here's a new format, we want to make this a standard. Invariably, the reaction of the competitor is, well, we're not going to go anywhere near it. Why should we give you an advantage? No, this is very much a studio-driven initiative, and it's driven by a simple reality that it's the economics of production make it easier if individual studios working on a common film project can work from a common asset pool and with high degree of confidence that assets made in one studio can be used in another.
Yeah. So, not a lot of people would actually know that Pixar has a software division.
Right.
So, from where you sit, do you see Pixar as being a software company more so than a production company, or is it 50-50?
Well, I mean, clearly in scale, Pixar is a film animation feature film studio. We're talking about movies here which generate hundreds of millions of dollars. That's just in the box office, or more than that. So the software side of things is obviously very small compared to the size of the business of the studio. However, the software component and the technology and research component of Pixar is what underpins the films. Question often asked is, why does Pixar make this technology available? Why do we license rendering technology for other studios to use? And the simple answer is, and Ed Catmull has often reiterated this point, is that having the software stress tested, hammered, beaten, tortured in every conceivable use case in different studios actually benefits all of us. It leads to a more robust solution
and problems that are found
and confidence, because ultimately you're going to hang $200 million movie off of an expectation it can deliver a certain level of visual quality. Confidence is everything. So the more people who hammer it, the better.
People who small-time hobbyists or even people trying to get into the industry that are learned, can they access?
Yes. Yeah, so earlier this year we announced that RenderMan specifically would be made freely available to anyone as long as it's not used commercially. You can go to the Pixar website, under the RenderMan tab, you can download a license today, and you can do whatever you like with it. It's not watermarked, it's not time-bombed, there are no functional limitations. It's identical to the version being used in studios. Just don't make money with it. And we did this deliberately because we wanted, in conjunction with this technological change, to move to ray tracing and easier to use workflows that is characteristic of our rendering technology now, to kind of open up the whole access to this technology to everyone who has an aptitude or an inclination to want to do it.
Schools and universities and stuff?
We have literally hundreds of schools and universities that have added RenderMan to their training courses because now their students can literally have a home copy. They can build their own work, the work which they'll use to get jobs with at studios.
Legitimately make them work ready.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the right thing to do. Let's say from a business point of view, our business is larger studios. Studios obviously still need to have rendering capacity. It doesn't really do us any good in holding that technology back. We want to grow the industry, and that's kind of part of what Pixar is as well. Our perception of ourselves is as an innovator that is encouraging a whole new art form and a whole new industry to grow, just like Toy Story, the original movie, was the start of a new type of animated film that never been done before. So Pixar is more than a feature film studio. It's as much an innovator in technology and access to that technology.
Do you anything else?
Oh, yes. I'm happy to just keep going. When Pixar brought out RenderMan,
RenderMan's been a released product or solution since 1988, so it actually predates Pixar, the studio.
So when you brought it out, it said it had the public license. How did other studios react to that?
Well, at the time, I mean, it was unique when it first, because there wasn't any other solution that could produce photorealistic images. Essentially, RenderMan lies behind much of the modern revolution in visual effects. You know, when Toy Story was released in the early 1990s, a just as influential movie released around the same time as Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park was the first movie with fully computer-generated characters. You know, they were dinosaurs, but they were good enough that they could be composited with the live-action elements, and your sense of belief was suspended. It was convincing. Yeah. You know, before then there would be movies like The Abyss or The Terminator, which had very small shots, you know, or individual shots. But Jurassic Park was really the start of the modern visual effects revolution, where CG essentially supplanted, you know, traditional model making and animatronics and all of that.
It almost wasn't gimmicky. It
right.
was trying to be real.
Right. Yeah. And both of those came out of, it was RenderMan that made that possible. You know, if you couldn't render images photorealistically, in other words, convincingly combine it with live action, then this revolution would never have occurred. So it was in, you know, the right place at the right time. Yeah. You know, of the past 21 awards for visual effects, you know, Academy Awards, 19 were used RenderMan, to give an idea of how influential the technology has been.
Yeah, so you see those as your wins as well?
Well, I mean, they are obviously the wins of the studios who use the technology. You know, so I'll be the last person to claim too much, but you know,
surely it's a win for RenderMan.
But it's a win insofar as, you know, we were able to provide a photorealistic rendering technology that empowered those studios to produce the amazing work that they did. That's right.
In the future, what are you hoping to achieve?
So one really fascinating aspect of rendering images is that there are many dimensions to where it can grow. You know, a few years ago, everything was flat, right, and then we went to a stereoscopic phase, right, so everyone needs twice as many images, left eye, right eye, and then we have like 4K, you know, ultra high definition formats, we have high frame rates, for example. But where's all this leading? I mean, it's obviously connected to developments in immersive experiences. You know, whether it's VR as we understand the term, whether it's some kind of immersive dome type or 3D type formats. You know, this is a very fertile area of research, but it's all very much connected to the challenge of how do we create a photorealistic environment, visual environment, that will make you feel you're actually there.
Yeah.
And that's why if we were to draw an S-curve, you know, the technology S-curve, you know, from you know, where technology starts off slowly, then accelerates and becomes mature, rendering is still, it's not at the top of that curve, it's still some way down. You know, the state of health of the technology can be governed by the amount of research, academic research into it, and if you go to SIGGRAPH, you know, the papers, the talks, the research into different aspects of computer graphics is very vigorous, it's very healthy. So I would expect in future the immersive aspects of photorealism will become ever more accessible. You know, we'll feel more and more in the environment. That has to be a part of this. I think the accessibility of it to more individuals, both how we're doing it through, let's say, non-commercial RenderMan, but also through other technological developments. You know, the games industry is driving this also, let's not forget, especially through GPUs. You know, is there a point when photorealism will become, you know, like water, like electricity? Probably will be, you know. Maybe there's a point when it's all good enough. But then when it's good enough, this is a creative discipline. And directors especially are never going to do anything which is the same. I think an interesting direction is when you look at movies like 300 is a good example. You know, that was a very abstracted, you know, type of look which had its own inner feel. And I think that's where we'll, when we get to a more kind of commoditized, we say, photorealism, we're going to see new visual looks, you know, being explored that the public will become accustomed to. I can't predict what they are, none of us can, but I think that's where it will go.
So Pixar or RenderMan working with the VR technologies like the HoloLens?
Yeah, I mean, not specifically on HoloLens, but definitely as a rendering technology, we have been, used as a source of photorealistic visuals. Yes, yeah. I mean, there's a difference between the actual technology itself and the source of the visuals itself. I mean, ultimately, what we do is we simulate reality inside an algorithm, as you see it visually.
Yeah. You seem quite passionate about what you do.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. I live and breathe it.
Yeah.
But it's such the way I put it personally is, I think I'm of an age when I grew up and I'm thinking that I should be living on the moon by now. And that never happened, And I'm thinking maybe, history doesn't develop the way that we often think it will be. And in fact, the way we actually experience things like this in the future, and let's just take living on the moon or going to Mars, the Mars rover has high definition cameras on it. Curiosity, it has streaming video and all of this. Probably what's going to happen is that we'll be able to simulate and realize these experiences here on Earth virtually. But virtually in a way that really is hard to distinguish from reality. Maybe it's the holodeck in the future, but it's the promise of being able to getting there that to me is such an exciting part of what we do.
Yeah.
So what do you do to unwind?
What do you do to unwind? Actually, my night job is I'm an astrophotographer.
Really?
So, which is kind of, again, a type of technical art, right? I like to image deep sky objects. I like to process those images. I sometimes do three-dimensional reconstructions using computer graphics of, because the universe isn't flat, right? It's really a three-dimensional form. So it's kind of a connected area, but it's, I unwind actually just, when all of a sudden, there's too much stuff going on, just look up. And, nothing changes up there. It puts it into perspective.
What camera do you use?
For astrophotography, you can either use DSLR cameras like a Canon 60D or something like that, or 5D. But most deep sky astrophotography is actually done with cooled CCD cameras that are specifically developed for the purpose. Yeah. So they're actually cooled down to very low temperatures, so you eliminate all noise in the image, because these are really low light images where you want to capture every single photon. It's really photography taken to the nth degree, to ridiculous levels of precision, arc of seconds of precision, exposures lasting 30 or 45 minutes without the camera moving an arc second. That's I find that kind of technically and emotionally a satisfying challenge to take on.
I think it's just for us,
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks heaps for your time.
Pleasure. Yeah.
Fascinating listening to your story as well.
Yeah.
And where can people find you online?
You certainly can Google me. I pop up all the time. I don't actually have a separate website or anything.
You don't
like
have
that.
social media or Twitter?
I pop up every now and then.
And they can just find Render Man at the Pixar website if anyone wants to give it a go.
Yes, just literally go to pixar.com or just literally Google RenderMan How. RenderMan How, and that will take you to a site that only tells you where to get the free non-commercial version, but it has a community that shows the work of people who have been using it, shows you how to access tools like the Blender Bridge, for example, or other connections, has tutorials showing you how to use it. We wanted to build a community around this. So just Google RenderMan How, or just go to the Pixar website and there's a RenderMan tab there which will take you straight there anyway.
Awesome.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Well, it's great spending time with you guys. Thanks.
#me.co.nz